Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today, it really centers on one of the most critical and honestly often avoided aspects of language acquisition, actively building writing skills. The source material we're looking at presents a pretty fascinating tension, offering, well, a whole suite of techniques that range quite wildly, from these sort of low-pressure, consistency-driven habits to highly structured methods centered on immediate correction.
Right. And writing is recognized as an active skill. It uniquely strengthens knowledge because it forces the learner to, slow down, consider structure, precision, in a way that speaking often doesn't. But the core challenge for us, I think, is figuring out the optimal path for a beginner to actually develop this skill effectively.
Exactly. So our central question boils down to this. Should language learners prioritize consistent, low-stakes, free expression in writing, methods like the daily sentence or journaling, mainly to build confidence and habit first, or should they focus more heavily right from the get-go on structured, guided writing and systematic error correction to really solidify grammar and structural accuracy?
And I'll be arguing that this focused attention on structural accuracy through these guided methods and, importantly, immediate correction is actually essential for strengthening knowledge and ensuring quality output. I think we have to prioritize rigor, perhaps earlier than some might suggest.
And I'll take the position that prioritizing confidence and, frankly, high-volume consistency via uncorrected, simple, free writing is the necessary first step. It's the essential foundation, really, that helps conquer the learner's often paralyzing fear of the blank page. Fluency, in this view, precedes accuracy. Okay, so when we look at why writing is such a struggle for so many learners, the material gives us a pretty clear answer. It's avoidance. Many English learners just steer clear of writing. Why? Because they're worried, overly worried perhaps, about spelling and grammar mistakes. Now, if we accept this psychological barrier, that the root challenge is avoidance driven by fear, then, well, the most effective solution has to involve systematically removing that fear and establishing a non-threatening habit. This is really the philosophy behind the daily sentence technique. It's championed as the easiest way to start a writing habit, and it relies purely on low-stakes consistency. If you just commit to one single sentence every day, you kind of bypass that inner critic, the one that demands perfection in a 5-paragraph essay right away. The sheer volume, we're talking 365 pieces of output per year, is designed to normalize the act of writing itself. So the goal is behavioral change, building a strong habit so the learner is, as the text says, no longer afraid of writing.
Okay.
And furthermore, the concept of the private journal is vital here. It's described as a secret private space where one can write freely without worrying about mistakes. And that freedom, it explicitly states, is very important for building confidence. So the initial goal isn't grammatical perfection. It's simply getting accustomed to the act of expressing personal thoughts, maybe experiences, or summaries of the day in the target language. We have to neutralize that mental block before we can realistically demand structural refinement.
Right, Angle. Because while confidence is certainly, a welcome outcome, I question if it should be the primary driver of the method itself. The very definition of writing in the source material suggests a deeper cognitive function. Writing is called an active skill because, as the text notes, you have to slow down, choose your words carefully, and think about sentence structure. Now, that cognitive process strengthens knowledge. So this intrinsic value of writing seems linked to the rigor of structural consideration, not just the volume of potentially flawed output. If the main aim is to strengthen knowledge, then we really must use targeted, structured approaches that, frankly, guarantee correct exposure. This is why the method of copying is brought up. It's cited as a very old and effective learning method. When a learner copies a well-written paragraph, they are forced, absolutely forced, to pay incredibly close attention to every word, every comma, and every period. In that focused moment, the learner is actively noticing the structure of good writing, internalizing syntax, rhythm, that sort of thing. That structural immersion offers an immediate quality knowledge gain that trial and error free writing just can't match, especially early on.
Okay, and while, yes, ignoring mistakes might be fine for overcoming some initial anxiety, true learning, true strengthening of grammatical knowledge happens when errors are actually addressed systematically. The material promotes using technology to get feedback precisely because it forces that rigorous analysis. Learners aren't just told to accept the correction, they must try to understand why it was a mistake, identifying, for instance, the specific wrong verb tense or maybe a missing article. This structured analytical engagement with errors is where practical grammar learning truly solidifies the knowledge base. It's about quality, not just quantity.
Okay, let's push on this specific issue of uncorrected consistency because I think it represents the fundamental fault line between our opposing philosophies here. If a learner follows the daily sentence or the private journal method consistently, writing freely without correction, doesn't that inherently run a major risk? I mean, aren't they consistently practicing and potentially cementing repeated grammatical errors or structural flaws?
Exactly. I'm sorry, but I just don't quite buy that the simple accumulation of 365 potentially faulty sentences is the most efficient use of a learner's cognitive resources. If the process deliberately excludes a mechanism for correction, if the mistakes are sort of shielded in that secret private space you mentioned, how can the knowledge of precise grammar and sentence structure possibly be strengthened? We know from, well, a lot of pedagogical research that habit without rigor risks creating persistent bad habits, and those are significantly harder to unlearn later on. If the focus is only on fluency now, aren't we just deferring a much more difficult, maybe even painful correction phase down the line?
That's an interesting point, and I do acknowledge the legitimate concern about entrenching errors. However, I would frame this differently. You seem to be focusing primarily on the quality of the final product, the sentence or paragraph itself, whereas I'm emphasizing the necessity of the input mechanism first, the ability to actually generate content reliably, without freezing up. The power of these free writing techniques is fundamentally behavioral, right? It's about building a strong habit and overcoming that linguistic paralysis. If fear prevents the learner from ever producing a paragraph long enough to even merit your detailed structural analysis, then accuracy becomes a moot point, doesn't it? The material mandates that we have to begin with simple, short, and practical exercises.
But simple doesn't have to mean uncorrected.
Well, even if a daily sentence has a flaw, let's say an incorrect article or verb ending, the basic act of organizing one's thoughts into some kind of subject-verb-object framework is still a fundamental active step. The risk of entrenching minor errors is, I argue, outweighed by the guarantee that the learner is now consistently accessing vocabulary, retrieving it, and constructing basic linear narratives. We have to get the engine running before we start worrying about fine-tuning the carburetor, so to speak. The focus on confidence isn't about ignoring mistakes forever. It's about ensuring mistakes happen frequently enough to form a pattern that can then be corrected more efficiently, perhaps later.
Okay.
That said, let's address your point on structural efficiency more directly. Your preference leans heavily on the guided writing method of copying, which, you argue, models perfection immediately.
Precisely. We have to ask, why rely on generating mistakes, even if manageable ones, when you can immediately internalize success? Guided writing techniques like copying provide immediate, 100% accurate structural immersion. The learner's attention is focused on precision right from the beginning, internalizing the rhythm, the syntax of fluent, correct language. This structured modeling is immediate and, I believe, highly effective at strengthening knowledge because it prioritizes modeling cognitive effort, paying attention to the structure that already works, over generating cognitive effort, which involves trying to retrieve and construct novel and very likely flawed output. It feels like a more proactive approach to accuracy, bypassing the slow, potentially error-prone trial and error of free creation.
Right. While modeling is certainly useful for noticing structure, I won't deny that, it often lacks the critical ingredient for long-term retention: personalization. The material strongly argues, and I think this is key, that the brain remembers things best when they are connected to our own lives, our feelings, and our experiences. We see this echoed in the suggestion to use personalized writing prompts, which apparently make writing feel like a fun game, asking learners about their favorite holiday or a personal goal, things like that.
Okay.
Pure copying, just by its nature, removes this personal connection almost entirely. It risks becoming just rote transcription, an activity detached from personal history or any emotional stakes. In contrast, when a learner creates a personal sentence like linking a new abstract word, maybe determination, to a goal they personally struggled with, that deeply personal connection is described, quite vividly, as being like glue for your memory. So fluency, retrieval, and long-term memory retention seem best served when the output is genuinely connected to the learner's self, not just copied from a textbook page.
That's a compelling argument regarding memory, I grant you. But we need to consider whether that emotional personalization actually constitutes the highest form of active learning available in the material. For strengthening knowledge specifically, we both agree writing is an active skill.
Your definition of active learning seems to prioritize the sheer generation of novel output, creating one's own version of a story, summarizing, expressing personal thoughts in a journal. But if I may probe that assumption a bit, if a person journals daily for, say, 6 months, but never receives or processes any correction, are they truly strengthening their knowledge of the language system, the grammar? Or are they merely strengthening a motor skill, the physical act of writing, or retrieving basic words they already know? Is it deep learning?
Well, I'd say active learning involves retrieval and organization of novel output. When you write a summary in your own words, you are actively retrieving vocabulary and organizing ideas, regardless of where the prompt came from. You are, in essence, making the language your own.
I still must argue that the true strengthening of knowledge comes not just from generation, but from cognitive effort directed specifically at resolving structure and error. Look again at the process described for using technology feedback. The key step isn't just receiving the correction. The learner must try to understand why it was a mistake, identifying, for instance, why a particular subordinate clause was constructed incorrectly, or why the past perfect tense was required instead of the simple past.
Right. The analysis part.
Exactly. That analytical self-correction step, that deep dive into why the grammar failed, is arguably the most rigorous form of strengthening knowledge and organization of thoughts possible within this context. It transforms writing from simple, possibly flawed expression into a powerful, practical grammar lesson. That focused, systematic analysis represents to me the highest form of active engagement described in the material, because it directly targets the underlying mechanisms of the language system itself.
I'm still not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning, mainly because it feels like it creates a bit of a false choice. You can't analyze a mistake you haven't yet made consistently enough to notice, or perhaps haven't been brave enough to make in the first place. The free expression methods are necessary, I believe, to create the raw material, the output, that can then be subjected to your rigorous analysis. If the learner is so paralyzed by the potential for error that they never actually create a paragraph complex enough to submit for technological feedback, then the rigor you champion becomes, inaccessible, doesn't it? Consistency breeds the courage to make mistakes. Correction is only truly useful once mistakes are occurring frequently enough to form patterns that can actually be diagnosed and worked on.
Material for that structural study without requiring the learner to face the anxiety of original generation first. It sort of bypasses the fear issue by focusing the learner's attention immediately on the correct structure, thereby proactively preventing or at least minimizing the entrenchment of errors from the start. The analytical effort is immediate in that case too. It's about noticing the placement of, say, restrictive clauses in the model paragraph provided, not just identifying the missing comma in your own flawed sentence later. It's about building a robust internal blueprint before attempting free construction, perhaps.
Okay, so to summarize my position, consistency and confidence are, I maintain, the indispensable bedrock of effective writing skill development. Since the source material clearly identifies avoidance and fear as the primary obstacles for many, Learners must start with simple, short, practical exercises like the daily sentence or the private journal, specifically to conquer that fear of writing. This strategy ensures the learner builds the foundational habit and generates sufficient output, which allows them to engage fully with the skill before we demand structural perfection or rigorous error analysis.
And while consistency is certainly valuable, yes, for habit formation and overcoming inertia, the ultimate objective outlined in the material seems to be strengthening knowledge. Achieving that goal, I argue, requires incorporating techniques like structured copying and systematic correction using technology feedback. These methods ensure the learner actively internalizes correct structure and grammar, focusing their cognitive effort where it yields the most practical, precise knowledge gain, which is in understanding the mechanism of error and modeling correct linguistic construction.
And so the tension remains, doesn't it? The immediate need for, let's say, fearless fluency and output generation versus the ultimate demand for structural accuracy and high-quality knowledge strengthening.
It does. The source material definitely underscores that writing is a powerful skill. It helps organize thoughts, solidify knowledge of vocabulary, grammar. Both approaches, one focused more on low-stakes fluency first, the other prioritizing structural rigor, offer credible pathways to achieve this. The strongest learners, one imagines, will likely find ways to integrate both, building consistency with high-quality, practical, error-focused learning over time.
Yeah, there is clearly more to explore in how these methods should perhaps be sequenced or integrated into a developmental curriculum to move a learner successfully from that daily simple expression towards more advanced, accurate writing.
Absolutely. Thank you for this discussion.
Thank you.